Welcome back to the next study on the 7 Commandments. We're going to, as stated in the last video, now that we have the 7 Commandments laid out and they can be seen here on the screen, we'll now dig into the 6th Commandment, that thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house, and thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, and so forth. What is really being talked about here? This commandment never really made a whole lot of sense to me. So it seems like this is covered in the above commandments, 1 through 5. If you're not to covet your neighbor's wife, isn't that the same as lusting after? Committing adultery in your mind, which is the higher level of applying thou shalt not commit adultery. So why is it repeated here in this commandment? How is coveting your neighbor's goods any different than desiring to steal your neighbor's stuff in your mind, but you never steal it physically? So it's covered under that commandment. So this commandment never made any sense to me. It's like you're repeating what's under the other commandments. So if we look at the Hebrew definition of this word translated as covet, you see it's to desire, to take pleasure in, to delight, to delight greatly, to desire greatly. It doesn't seem to be a mistranslation of this word. So it looks like the scribes replaced whatever the word was that it was originally here. This commandment has puzzled me for most of my adult life. I never understood it. 4 weeks ago, Father gave me the answer on Sabbath morning while talking with him and pondering on his law. Father took me to the story in 1 Samuel 8 about the people rejecting Samuel and wanting a king. In verse 7 of chapter 8, Father says to Samuel, "For they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them." This is peculiar because we're presented with nothing saying that there's anything against them having government or kings. In fact, it looks like he blesses David in being one of the first kings along with Saul. But we see then in verse 8 just how seriously Father is taking what they're doing. According to all the work which they have done since the day that I brought them up out of Egypt, even unto this day, where they have forsaken me and served other gods, so do they also unto thee. So Father is warning them through Samuel of the shortcomings, the corruptness that'll come in from having someone rule over them. And when we get down to verse 18, "And you shall cry out in that day because of your king, which you shall have chosen you. And the Creator will not hear you in that day." Nevertheless, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel. Father was trying to get them not to do this, and yet the scribes have corrupted this into Father all of a sudden like, "Hey, I don't know what I'm talking about, and I'm always changing. I'm not the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow." He says, "Go ahead and anoint Saul as a king, and then later go ahead and anoint David." And we eventually end up with the corrupt kingship of Samuel, which splits the nation. So which is it? Did Father not want them to have a king, and this was wrong, and they were rejecting him? Or, it's okay. It wasn't so that much big of a deal. Well, that's what it appears to be, because we don't see any commandment against this. When we go back to the book of Genesis, and in the very beginning of creation, we're told that man was to have dominion over everything on earth except their fellow man. They were not to have dominion. Nothing is presented that there would be dominion. Certain people would have dominion over women or over children or over other men. This is a further indication that Father gave me that this is exactly what the covenant command actually is. They put the word covenant in there when it more likely is the word dominion. You shall not have dominion over your neighbor's wife, your neighbor's good. No man is to have rule over another man. We are all sovereigns in our own right. Even Father, who has the most authority, doesn't rule us like men do, like our fellow men do, even to this day. And when we look at the Hebrew word for subdue, kavash, it is close to the word that they're translating as covet. Kamad. Kavash, kamad. Is this the subtle change they made? We are not to subdue. We are not to have dominion over our fellow man. We are only supposed to subdue ourselves, to have dominion over our own desires and to keep them in control and to become righteous and follow Father's laws. So them that they're rejecting him because they're rejecting his commandment. They had to remove this commandment because it does away with all royalty. It does away with all heads of religions. You can't even have that there because they subject you and they'll cast you out of the churches. Even peer pressure gets into this, falls under here. Judging another person. In a matter of the mind, this command is putting yourself in a higher place, thinking that you are better than other people. That would be covered under this command. You are not to have dominion over other people. So there's always been this other associated problem with slavery in the Bible. On the one hand, it looks like Father's against it, yet there are these laws supposedly written by Moses that slavery is okay as long as it's not of the nation of Israel. You know, you can have slaves of people from outside the other nations. Father's not that way. He has one law for all people. He doesn't have these special ones for a certain group and then it changes for another. So in Leviticus 25, verse 42, for they are my servants which I brought forth out of the land of Egypt. They shall not be sold as bondsmen. They shall not be slaves. For thou shalt not rule over him with rigor or subdue him, but shall fear thy God. Why? Because the commandment is not to do this. When we look at Exodus 10, verse 3, we see that when Moses is confronting Pharaoh, he says, thus says the Creator, how long wilt thou refuse to humble thyself before me? We can now see that the context of humble is with this commandment that he is breaking. He is subjecting other people, the so-called Israelites, to be slaves, to be subject to Pharaoh's rule. And through Moses, Father is telling Pharaoh to let my people go. You have no right over them. The commandment says otherwise. And looking at other places where the word humble is used in Deuteronomy 8:2, he was testing them to humble them, to get them to see this sixth commandment, that they're not to seek to have dominion over other people. He even says to prove thee, to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments. And this is pointing towards the sixth commandment, not to have dominion over others. In 2 Chronicles 7:14, if my people which are called by my memorial shall humble themselves, not take dominion over other people, not think of themselves as more important, and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sins and I will heal their land. So in all these other verses where humble is used, in Job, in the Psalms, and Proverbs, you can see it's pointing back to the sixth commandment. And reading what it says in Isaiah 57, for thus says the high and lofty one that inhabits eternity, whose memorial is holy. I dwell in the high and holy place with him that is of a contrite and humble spirit, one who does not seek dominion over another, whether in reality or in their mind, to revive the spirit of the humble, to revive the heart of the contrite ones. And it's interesting in Jeremiah 13, say unto the king and queen, say to the royalty, say to those who have dominion, humble yourself, give up your dominion, sit down, for your principalities shall come down, even the crown of your glory, because this was never meant to be and goes against his sixth commandment. And then going into the New Testament in Matthew 18, whosoever shall humble himself as this little child, the same is great in the kingdom of heaven. So humble takes on a totally different meaning than what we've been told. We're not to have dominion over others. And a similar word to humble is meek. So we look at those verses that have meek in it, and you can begin to see this is also talking about the sixth commandment, not to have dominion, not to try to subdue other people, to get them to follow your ways, your thoughts. Numbers 12, now the man Moses was very meek above all the men which were upon the face of the earth. He fully understood the law, and he did not seek to subdue or have dominion over anyone, even though the position he was put into could very well lead him into doing that. In Psalm 37:11, but the meek shall inherit the earth and shall delight themselves in the abundance of peace. Those who do not seek to have dominion, they inherit the earth. They inherit eternal life. And we'll see this repeated in the Gospels. Psalm 147. And the Creator lifts up the meek. He casts the wicked down to the ground. All based on the sixth commandment. It's not coming out of nowhere. This is based on the sixth commandment. In Isaiah 61:1, the Spirit of the Creator is upon me because the Creator anointed me, gave me His Holy Spirit to preach good tidings unto the meek, those who do not break the sixth commandment. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, to get them out of the bondage brought by other men who were breaking the sixth commandment, and opening up a prison to them that are bound. Very interesting in all these verses. But then finally we get to Matthew 5:5, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. This is what is part of the Sermon on the Mount with the Beatitudes. And if you look at the Beatitudes from Matthew 5, verse 3 on to verse 10, 11, even into 12, if you read this, you can see that this is a breakdown of the sixth commandment, that we are not to have dominion over other people. So blessed are the poor in spirit, those who do not seek to subject others, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are they that mourn. This isn't mourning in the sense that we have. Those who give up any desire to control things, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. We don't force it on other people. Even His Father doesn't force His laws on people. It's something we must come to learn and want to do on our own, of our own will and our own accord. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Peacemakers know that you can't subdue, you can't have dominion over other people. So you don't go to war. You come in peace. Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So these Beatitudes, which seem to be something new, are not. They are just a expounding of the sixth commandment, which has become obscured by the scribes. I hope you can see this. It's been very exciting for me that Father has shown this. In the next video, we'll tackle the first commandment, the you shall honor your mother and father, and get into what that commandment is really about and why they have hidden what the real commandment is there. Blessings.